We wish you the grace and peace of God through Christ again this evening. It's a delight to be with you. The ushers are handing out two handouts. One of them is called, at the top of the page, A Comparison of Cultures. And this is not something we're going to necessarily get to. The times I presented this, there usually is a 4-session series. And so Brother Anthony asked if I could squeeze it into 2. And so if you felt like you were getting a little overloaded this morning, maybe I was trying to squeeze too much in. But it is instructive to think about pop culture. I really hammered on that a bit this morning, how pop or mass culture has flattened a lot of the cultures in the world. So there's a column for pop culture, and on the other side, there's a column for traditional and high culture or classical culture. And it simply gives you differences between those two types of culture. The church has traditionally tended to align itself more closely with folk culture or with traditional culture. Some of your church styles will be more high culture or classical. I also have a list of resources there. These are books. If you want to dig deeper into this matter of culture, you're welcome to check into those. I have my little comments about those. There's also some other audio and visual sources. How many of you have heard the talk given by Daryl Durstein on culture? Anybody? Okay, at least 2 of you, or 3. He is a fascinating speaker. He gave this talk, I believe, at Living Hope Christian Fellowship just earlier this year. It was an evening youth Bible school, if I understand correctly. And that's very helpful. I did not realize till last evening, after I'd already copied off these handouts, that I don't even have John D. Martin's booklet on here, so that's awful. Please don't tell him. I will rectify that, Lord willing, in the next round. But that is for you to look at. This evening, I also have a handout for you. If you want to fill it out, that's fine. If you just want to follow along or discard it entirely, that is up to you as well. Last summer, there was a young lady in our church, Shalom, who went with the water program based out of Sharon Mennonite Bible Institute, a group of young people, to Dominican Republic. There were 10 people in their main group, and partway through their time there in the DR, they decided to take a day to sightsee, to go and look at a waterfall. And a number of them decided to hike to the top of that waterfall, and then several of the group that was at the top decided to cross over the waterfall. There was a place there where they could get on a rock and then jump across the stream and go to the other side and see what was there, just as young people like to do, right? And that was all well and good. There were 3 girls and 2 guys that crossed over in that way. But when they decided to come back, they realized that the rock they had to jump back onto on the other side had a bit of an incline to it, and it was mossy. And it went right down into the flowing stream there, and the edge of the waterfall was just a mere 10 feet away or so. And so the girls felt a bit intimidated, and they suggested that maybe the guys would be willing to help them. The first guy had already jumped over. He was fine. And so the second guy jumped over. And each of the girls took their turns jumping across, and they were fine until the last girl went to make the jump. And somehow her foot slipped, and she started to slide into that fast-flowing stream. And Justin, who was there on the rock, reached to help her. And in the midst of it all, somehow, she got onto the rock, and Justin slid into the water. And suddenly he's being carried downstream very quickly to the edge of the waterfall, which was 40 to 50 feet above the rocks upon which the water was pounding. Somehow, Justin managed to find a crevice or something with his toe just before he got to the edge of the waterfall. And he tried then to make his way back upstream, and he made his way a little bit upstream, tried to take off his shoes for better grip, and again was swept down, again found that amazing crevice somehow, and there he was. He was stuck. He just could not seem to find any way to move forward. The bank was too steep for him to get to. The current was too great for him to make upstream movement to safety. And the girls, as you can imagine, screamed and hid their eyes and weren't sure what to do next. The reality is that Justin could not combat that current. There was nothing that he could do. And I do plan to share the remainder of the story with you later in the message, but I want you to feel some of that tension that Justin was feeling. Because it's related to the fact that we do swim in various cultures every week. I'm sure we're in different cultures. And that's not the problem, necessarily. By God's grace, we are founded on the rock, Christ Jesus. Our sins are under the blood. We are safe and secure in Him. I think the danger is that we might forget that every culture is going somewhere. Every culture has a current to it. Every culture is leading to its version of the good life, and most cultures, of course, are leading away from God and away from the rock of our salvation. My main thrust this evening is simply this. I want you to know that cultures have currents. They're going somewhere, and so are you. Our text is found in Ephesians chapter 2. In the first session this morning, we looked at the fact that culture compounds. It's made up of multiple elements, but it also has a way of accruing, both in a good way or a bad way, depending on the culture, over the course of many years. In the good sense, of course, when people live well over the course of many years, social and cultural capital accrue, and we are able to draw from that. This evening we're considering the force of culture, the power of culture, and ways to resist or combat that current. In Ephesians chapter 2, it's a very well-known passage, no doubt. In the first 3 verses, Paul says, "And you he made alive, who were dead in trespasses and sins, in which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience, among whom also we all once conducted ourselves in the lusts of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, just as the others." If we're going to survive and thrive in the multicultural currents of the age, it's going to require us to develop strong countercurrents. It will demand a number of things from us. One of the first steps, I believe, is seeing the current. Seeing the current. And that's the difficulty. So often these currents are invisible to us. We do not see them. And yet, though they are invisible, they are very, very influential. We remember that culture is, quote, made up of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices. And except for the practices element, those other things tend to be under the waterline. Those goals, those values, those attitudes. And yet the current is always there for us to reckon with. Every person, whether a Christian or a non-Christian, must reckon with the force of the moving of culture. Probably the main reason I chose Ephesians 2 as our text is because of what Paul says there in verse 2. You'll note he says that before Jesus made us spiritually alive, we walked according to the course of this world. Do any of you here have a Spanish Bible? Okay. What does it say? Do you have it out? No, okay. Does anybody here have it open? And you can say, tell us what it says. Where it says that we walked according to the course of this world.
Which verse is that?
Verse 2, yeah, Ephesians 2, verse 2. Go ahead. Just walked according to the course of this world. Okay, my Spanish is very limited. Did I hear the word corriente in there? Corriente. Okay. In most Spanish Bibles, or a lot of the Spanish versions, it does have that word, which does mean current. Before we were resurrected to life in Christ, we tended to walk, or maybe just float, with the current of this world. In both the natural and supernatural realms, there are these forces for us to contend with. You can consider the fact of current. The natural world is made up of many currents, whether it's water currents or air currents or electrical currents. There might be others that I'm not thinking of. I don't know, is magnetism a current? Those of you that are scientifically minded. Anyway, we at least have the air, the water, and the electric. And they are invisible, largely to us, but of course they have great power. We can also think of the force of the current. We can go through life not giving these things much thought until they really get out of hand, or they surprise us. We cut that wire that we thought was dead, and it is alive. And suddenly we realize that there is an entity present that we had not thought about. We can consider the fate of current. In other words, the fact that it is going somewhere. And so it's very important for us to see, if you will, to have eyes to see the influences of the currents of culture. In some ways, it would be nice to ask God to just put a drop of dye into cultural currents so we could see them better. You know, blue for the good ones and some nasty brown for the bad ones. And we can just see what's emanating, and what's flowing around us, and what we need to avoid and what we need to get into. It'd be a lot easier. I think there are ways in the broader Christian world where we can, in a sense, make currents visible. I think that would be very important and helpful for us in counteracting and working with cultures. One of the buzz phrases of the last number of years has been engaging the culture. How many of you have heard of engaging the culture? Have you ever heard that phrase at all? Okay, maybe it's an Americanism, I don't know. But Andy Crouch, I recommend his book this morning. He gives 4 ways that evangelicals have tended to engage with culture. And to a lesser or greater degree, we as Anabaptists have also gone down these roads. One way to do it is condemning culture. We can just get on our little hobby horses, our little stool about how awful this element is over here and how terrible that bill is over there, and we wish that people would stop doing this thing and just really be unhappy, develop sort of a negative stance toward the world. That's one angle that the church has taken. Another one is critiquing culture. Analyze it, think about it. Worldview academies. What do they mean by that movie? What do the lyrics of that song indicate? What sort of underlying hunger should we see in the way these talks are going? Another option is copying culture. Well, okay, the world has its style of music. Let's bring in and develop contemporary Christian music, CCM, or Christian punk, or Christian heavy metal, or whatever. Let's copy the culture. Let's do that with movies. Let's do that with slogans. Got Jesus? And then a 4th way is consuming culture. Consuming culture. Well, I'm just going to take it in. Doesn't matter. I'm saved by the blood of the Lamb. I'm good to go. I can live however I wish and basically capitulate to the dominant cultural current. There are a number of handicaps, though, with these 4 ways of engaging with culture. One is, this is according to Andy, they don't really cause the Christian to do or live any differently than he did before. There is little to no effect on the condemner or the critiquer, and there are definitely negative effects on the copier and the consumer. And I want us to be very aware of that, because it's easy for us, at least I have in the past, for me to look at the evangelical world out there. I'm not bashing the evangelicals, I appreciate them, but to look at them and feel like they're really accomplishing something maybe. They're really reaching people. And there's a sense in which they probably are reaching people that we're not, and that's okay. But there's also a sense in which they're losing a lot of their people because of this attempt to engage with culture in ways that actually don't help them and actually hinder their young people. It doesn't, in the end, change them, doesn't cause them to live really any differently. They're just a lot smarter. When they go to the movies, they can really analyze those movies. But it doesn't really change their conduct. And then the second handicap is that they don't really do anything to or about the culture. It just doesn't affect much change in the broader world. I mean, when's the last time the world cared if we critiqued their stuff or not? By and large, they really don't care. And the reason this is because, as Crouch notes, no culture experiences itself as thin or incomplete. Everyone who's living their life feels like it's a full life, and it's a good life. And it's their vision of the good life. So a lot of cultural engagement has resulted in, quote, seeing the culture, analyzing it, but it has not affected much change either on the current itself or on the people who are stuck in that current. And yet becoming aware of the current is very important. It is vital for us if we are going to thrive and survive. Secondly, I'd like us to address standing in the current. There is a sense in which we cannot escape ungodly culture. If we're going to be in the world as God wants us to be, it is going to be all around us. Simply taking a walk down Main Street in Dunmore East will get us into the world, at least in the afternoon. If you go at 6:30 in the morning, you get pretty much have the place to yourself. That's great. But obviously, we are expected to be in culture. Jesus, in ungodly culture, Jesus' prayer in John 17:15 was, I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. And further, in Ephesians 6:13, this is the NIV, Paul counsels, therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything, to stand. We can stand in the current. We don't have to be blown about. We don't have to be desperate. We can take a stand in the midst of a cultural current that is trying to take us somewhere. So are there some cultural rules of engagement that we can consider? One of the things I'd like us to think about is, first of all, actualities. I know that's a big word. Basically, it's the realities of life. The reality is that only a more powerful current can overcome prevailing currents. It's also the fact that there are two kingdoms. And so there are two main currents, even though there are multiple ways in which the currents represent themselves or present themselves. In reality, there are only two main currents. I think we need to reckon with this reality and live it out in our bodies, physically, if we are going to win the cultural battle. This is nothing less than full body, whole armor combat. I think we need to consider our attitudes. One of those is humility. I think one of our secret weapons as Anabaptist and Brethren people has been our cultivation of yieldedness and humility. It's actually a very powerful weapon that overcomes in surprising ways. In a conceited age, we will find the power to stand by cultivating and maintaining an attitude of selflessness, of yieldedness. Another attitude to cultivate is honor. In an age that largely disregards and discards authority, we have the responsibility to consider our present actions in the light of the wisdom of our forefathers. The zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, is only concerned about right now, the present. And a lot of your generation have grown up with that kind of mindset. Not interested in history, not interested in what has happened. For them, a lot of them, their concept of history starts the day they were born. Now, if you recall the timeline that we had on the whiteboard, if their history starts from the day they were born, about 20 years ago or so, That's a very tiny slice of all that has happened in life, in history. It gives them a very narrow view. You, as young people, with a heritage and inheritance and ancestors, have the opportunity for a much bigger view of life. But it only comes if we cultivate honor, a willingness to honor those who have come before us and have done their best to live godly lives. I think it's also good for us to cultivate hope. In an age that tends towards cynicism and despair, we have the opportunity to paint a picture of the overcoming power of Jesus and his kingdom. And while I speak a little bit disparagingly about your generation as being very narrow, I'm very hopeful when I read about revival, renewal movements taking place among Gen Z. And apparently it is a real thing, at least in America. Young people your age are hungry for the Bible. Bible sales are way up. There's a real interest in something of substance. There's a real desire for something that has a history. I think there's a real desire for something that is honorable. And of course, something that has hope. And so that makes me a very encouraged person. Young people especially tend to be all for action, and that's a great thing. You have the energy for the action. I commend you to use that well. But what I want you to know is that it's important for you, as you're energetic in your action, really seek to embrace the things of enduring value, the things that will last. And that will probably involve interacting with people who are older than you, maybe even people who are dead. You're doing that already in Brother Gerald's class. We've talked about Crouch's observation that condemning, critiquing, copying, and consuming do not actually make any net effect change on culture. So what sort of healthy action can we take? And Crouch does offer two. The first one he offers, for engaging culture, if you will, is to cultivate godly culture. This involves something that can be very hard, maybe, possibly, for some young people, and even for older people. Because cultivation doesn't feel like I'm really doing anything. It feels sort of a passive. And yet cultivation is tending to what has been given to us. It's the primary step toward doing something more. In our case, it's about becoming people of substance through practices that matter. The world has a lot of practices, but a lot of them are very demeaning. They actually have a way of leaching value out of us, and we become much less than God ever intended us to be. Chaff, as the psalmist pictures it, versus people of substance. It's good for us to ask questions, to learn about the ways of the people who came before us. I think this is where godly tradition and traditions help to form us and to form a certain character and virtue within us, if we're receptive to them. In his excellent book, Love What Matters, by Joseph Gibbs, he's actually an Eastern Orthodox man, he quotes Gustav Mahler as saying, "Tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire." It is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire. Later, Gibbs, he's a very interesting writer, don't agree with everything he says, of course, but he says, though traditionalists often speak appreciatively of the past, they are not terribly interested in any particular time. In fact, the opposite is true. Traditionalists are interested in that which has transcended time. That a distant golden age is distant means it has not lasted, which means it wasn't golden in the first place. Tradition is not the worship of ashes, and so the traditionalist is content for mankind to collectively decide not to pass on certain books, symphonies, plays, and structures to their children. When bulldozers move in to demolish a football stadium built in the 1980s, no traditionalist heroically stands in the way. Neither do traditionalists oppose buying new socks or replacing chip plates and saucers. Traditionalists favor what has lasted, not what happens to be around. Traditionalists prize things that last simply because most things don't. And when something does not last, they know that it is usually the thing's fault. So cultivation is not about setting up monuments to the past. It's about asking ourselves, what are the things that continue to exist because they're worthy of continuing to exist? And they deserve our ongoing cultivation, to care for them. It is the necessary first step to accomplish anything of value. Now, we don't want to just survive in the cultural currents. We also want to thrive, of course. And so I believe it is important to, of course, see the current, to stand in the current, but then thirdly, for us to be able to experience striding through the current. Once we've cultivated those aspects of godly value that have been passed on to us, then we are in good shape to do what we're probably very excited about doing, and God has made us excited about it, and that is that other step that Crouch talks about, creating godly culture. We love to create. We've been designed to create in the image of our Creator. Of the various postures toward cultures, so we talked about condemning, critiquing, copying, consuming, and now cultivating, creating. Of those various 6 postures, Crouch notes that cultivating and creating are the 2 positive, productive options open to Christians. Cultivation must precede creation for us to survive. Creation must succeed cultivation for us to thrive. So as we work with the basic materials we've been given in life, we have this opportunity to take them and make them into something different and new and better. I was telling you about Justin. He's at the edge of the falls. He's about to be washed over the edge to the rocks 40 to 50 feet below. The girls immediately got into a huddle and began praying like they had never prayed before, as you can imagine. The men on the bank, there were 2 of them who immediately got their heads together to decide what options they had. There were actually 3 guys there. They thought that perhaps if they would clamber down the bank, they could take off their shirts and tie them together into a rope. And so they clambered down the bank, and yet as they looked at the current, as they looked at Justin's situation, they were afraid that shirts alone would not provide the strength needed to rescue Justin. And if the rope, quote unquote, broke, obviously that could well be their last chance. So they decided to donate their belts and trousers as well. Again, the girls' backs were turned, they're praying fervently, so all is well. Justin even managed to contribute his shirt and toss it toward the bank. And so they fashioned this makeshift rope out of all these articles of clothing. Fascinating, because in Spanish, ropa is clothing. So it was a rope of clothing. And interestingly enough, the married man, so there were 2 single men, there was a married man. The married man is the one who volunteered to inch his way out on the rocks and get as close as he could and toss this rope to Justin. And he did. He tossed it. Justin was able to grab a hold of it, and he was able to pull Justin to safety. They got to the bank, they reclothed themselves, and they were just scrambling up the bank when the girls turned around and realized that Justin had been delivered. What a relief. What a blessing. Now we recognize that what these men were doing is they were cultivating culture. They were taking what they had been given, and then they were using it to create culture. They were creating something that would provide a means of rescue for Justin, who could not save himself. I think the total rescue took about 20 to 25 minutes. So I'm sure that in the midst of it, it felt like a very long period of time. Crouch notes that people who consider themselves stewards of culture, guardians of what is best in a neighborhood or an institution or a field of cultural practice, gain the respect of their peers. Even more so, those who go beyond being mere custodians to creating new cultural goods are the ones who have the world's attention. Indeed, those who have cultivated and created are precisely the ones who have the legitimacy to condemn, whose denunciations, rare and carefully chosen, carry outsized weight. Cultivators and creators are the ones who are invited to critique, and whose critiques are often the most telling and fruitful. Cultivators and creators can even copy without becoming mere imitators, drawing on the work of others, yet extending it in new and exciting ways. And when they consume, cultivators and creators do so without becoming mere consumers. So you take something like this purple book that we have here, it's on this front bench. This is the result of somebody who said, I'm not just going to condemn the bad music that's out there. I'm not going to critique the other music that's out there. I'm not going to merely copy. I'm going to seek to cultivate. This is not a book of all new hymns. This is cultivating what has been passed down for many years. There are some new ones in here. And so it's both a work of cultivation and creation to form the hymns of the church, an entirely new cultural artifact, but that has a very significant influence across the Anabaptist world. Why am I pointing that out to you, young people? I'm pointing it out to you because you are going to be tempted in the vibrancy of your youth to immediately start condemning and critiquing the traditions that have been handed to you without first of all taking time to think about cultivating an appreciation, or at least an awareness of why those traditions exist in the first place. Once you have taken the time to cultivate that, then you're free to create. Does the Anabaptist world need some maybe new traditions, new ways of doing things? I'm all for it. If it's better, if it's thicker, if it continues to give us the identity of pilgrims and strangers, of kingdom servants, let's do it. But just like learning to play an instrument or learning to write well or any type of trade, you always start with the basics. You don't start right off by doing something brand new. You start with what has been given to you, and then you have the freedom to improvise and to build on what you've cultivated. So I want to encourage you to consider that. And sometimes it takes a lot of time. It looks like maybe you'll never make a difference, but I want to encourage you, keep at it. Maintain a good spirit and a good attitude. And you'll be able to walk through the tensions and pressures surrounding you. Are there some other things that can help us in this striding through the current? There are a number of things that I think of. One is underappreciated practices. And I'm particularly thinking of the things we habitually do as a group because we're part of that group. There's incredible power in habit to do a number of things, especially a thick habit. There's power to inform. Whatever you're wearing, you are informing other people what you think about yourself. You're presenting a certain image, and you're saying, this is who I am, or this is who I want to be. There's the power to form. What we wear tends to shape how we think, and what we think of ourselves. I've thought different times it'd be interesting to do a little experiment and have an entire church show up with orange prison suits on. If you've ever been to prison, you know that those things look really nasty. I just have a feeling that wearing something like that has a way of working on a person's view of themselves. It forms them. It has the power to conform us to certain group ideals, group values, and even group virtues. And it also, these habits that we do as a group have the power to transform. In other words, to take us beyond what we would have expected or thought of on our own. I was talking this morning about the thick and thin practices and cultures. James K. Smith, I list two of his books there in your handout. He says if we mistakenly think that certain habits or practices are neutral or even thin when they're actually quite thick and loaded, then we will be unwittingly subjecting ourselves to a formation of our desire that is pointed away from the kingdom of God. I don't know if you've ever gotten this accusation, but I've heard it a number of times in my life, the accusation that conservatives really don't want to change anything. Have you ever heard of that, Brother Anthony, or something similar to that? Anybody else ever hear that? They just want to keep it all the same, no change. But I don't think that's really entirely fair. I think for most of us as conservatives, we're not concerned about changing things. I'm concerned about trading something of great and thick value in for something that's very thin and very transient with little value. And I see people making these trades so often. Heather looks at Instagram and I look at Facebook, so I guess we each have our own social media platform, but it doesn't take too long on there to realize there are lots of people who are trading down. Now, I'm not against change, but why would anyone want to change something that's really good for something that's not nearly as good? I don't understand that part. That just doesn't compute in my mind. So conservatives are not against change. I think we're against what we see as a very unenduring change, a very bad trade-off, so to speak. If something has lasted, that means that it has been tested and is found enduring. Roger Scruton writes that modern liberals tend to scoff at the idea of tradition. All traditions, they tell us, are invented, implying that they can therefore be undone. However, he argues, a real tradition is not an invention. Have you ever heard that? A real tradition is not an invention. It is an unintended byproduct of invention, which means that men cannot call traditions into existence. Rather, we merely recognize that traditions have come into being while we were busy doing other things. Gibbs says, the truth of Scruton's claim should be obvious to anyone who has ever tried to invent a tradition from whole cloth. Most traditions are born either from intense suffering or triumph over intense suffering. Because traditions cannot be suddenly and willfully created, it is more fitting that we view them as natural objects for which we are merely custodians than as our possessions to treat however we like. I realize you have a school here, and Joshua Gibbs is a classical education teacher in a high school. And one of the assignments that he gives his high school students, he asks them to think up a tradition that they think a tradition that will last 100 years. I think that's a good class assignment. Gibbs says that his students pretty well all spend a lot of time on this. They think it through, they consider what would be best, and then they turn in their work. But he said, most of them tell him sadly, I don't think it's going to work. This illustrates how powerful, or actually how difficult it is, to create tradition. And yet there's a concept out there, even in the Anabaptist world, that somehow, as easily as we discard traditions, we can make them up as well. That's false. That is not true. And so it is important for us to steward the good ones. I'm not here to say that all traditions are good, but it is important for us to identify and steward the enduring ones. It's important for us to think about undeveloped principles when it comes to striding through the current. The principle of identity. I touched on this morning. You are not primarily a thinker, a believer, or a doer, although Anabaptists, we really do a lot of things. These are not the things that ultimately shape us, because we are ultimately lovers. It's the things that we love that shape what we become. Our identity is most strongly based in that of the lover. And so the thick practices are very important for us to analyze because they have a way of pointing our loves in a certain direction. That's why, as strange as it may seem, this little rectangular device is a very thick thing. Very thick. Thin in nature, stature, thick in practice. If you have one, I'm going to guess that you reach for it quite a bit more often than you reach for your Bible. Now, you might be disappointed to find this out, but that's what I do. It's a thick practice. It has a way of orienting our loves. It's interesting because Leland Ulrich, who was here visiting this morning, was talking to me after the service, and he said that he tells young people and his own children that people dress toward their preferred future. You can tell by how a person dresses what their vision of the future and their preferred future is. Do they prefer a serious, sober future or a casual, let it all hang out future? So I might go from preaching to meddling here, but meddling often keeps people awake because that's where it really gets interesting. I do ask myself, brothers and sisters, if a man calls himself a plain man and he never dresses in plain attire and does not particularly live a plain life, can he credibly call himself a plain person? And in our Anabaptist circles, particularly our conservative Anabaptist circles, we seem content to ask our sisters to bear almost all the marks of nonconformity and separation. People only know that you and me, us guys, are plain because we're with her. And you girls seem to be okay with it, I guess. Are you okay with it? Should we guys be a little more intentional about identifying with the people that we say we belong to? Now, I'm not even asking for an everyday situation, okay? I'm just saying maybe several Sundays a year we could look plain. Is that thick enough to form our identity? I don't know. I don't have the stats on that. I will say that I talked to a River Brother and coworker of mine. He's a young man, and I was raising this question about the women bearing the marks of identity. He said, I asked one of our youth girls that one time, and asked if she was okay with that, and she said, yeah, she was, because she said, we girls know that our turn's coming. If the guys don't have to be plain, at some point down the road, the girls won't have to be either. Now, that was one girl's take on it. That may not represent every girl. But what is your vision, young men? What is your vision for leading a family? What is your vision for plugging into a group that is bigger than yourself? I'm not saying it has to be the Anabaptists. I think the Anabaptists are great people. That's where I'm casting my lot. I think it's the best hope that we have for something of enduring value. But every person has to make a choice. What is it that will be best for you and your family? What is it that has substance? What is it that has a heritage? If you're not willing to receive a legacy, you will not be able to leave a legacy. So if your vision of the good life is to be a plain man, are you willing to dress toward that vision? Now, I'll offer the caveat that I think every brotherhood should work together to decide what this looks like. So I'm not here to prescribe. I'm simply here to dig around your roots a little bit and encourage you to think. We're facing tremendous cultural currents that are seeking to sweep our young men away. And our young women are left many times wondering, where does he stand? Is he a plain person, or is he playing the fringes? You can relax. The meddling is over. We should consider the principle of incarnation. What you cease to behave, you eventually cease to believe. People like to argue for the principle as non-negotiable and the practice as neither here nor there. But you know, it is the things that we actually do that we tend to actually believe. Again and again, history has proved that the practice and the principle go together. To discard the practice is to discount the principle and eventually drop the principle as well. I've seen this in my own denomination, the Brethren in Christ. They were very plain. They had prescribed colors of clothing, a certain cut for the ladies and for the men. And then they decided that things like the head covering and feet washing were good in principle, and it was still in the rule book, but it didn't have to be practiced. And now today, the principle is gone as well. Consider also the principle of imitation. Who you imitate is who you become. In our culture that prizes, quote, authenticity and places a premium on novelty and uniqueness, imitation has received a bad rap, Gibbs says, as if being an imitator is synonymous with being a fake. Think imitation leather. He says, but the New Testament holds imitation in a very different light. Indeed, we are exhorted to be imitators. Follow my example, Paul says, as I follow the example of Christ. Similarly, Paul commends imitation to the Christians at Philippi. He says, join together in following my example, brothers and sisters, and just as you have us as a model, keep your eyes on those who live as we do. So just like little children learn from their parents by mimicking them how to mow the yard or make cookies or any number of things, we also learn the virtues by imitating those who are living out those things. Imitation is a good thing. It's how we learn so many things. Gibbs says this is the part of the formative power of our teachers who model the Christian life for us. We have Johnny here, we have Emily. Any other teachers here at the school? And obviously, Josiah, yes. You play a special role in offering to your students a role model for them to imitate. And of course, anyone who's interacting with young people, you have that opportunity and that power. The principle of investment. We mentioned this morning. You are gaining, leveraging, maintaining, or squandering social and cultural capital. When a group of people lives well together over a period of time, guess what? The current, which is a good current, becomes currency. Same root word. You can spend it. You can use it. You can enjoy it. You can appreciate it. That's the value of being part of a group that has built up social and cultural capital. So, on the other side of that, people and groups who react, for whatever reason, tend to recede because they cut themselves off from that social and cultural capital. They no longer have access to all that has been accrued in the group. I'm not saying that's why you should stay, but that's a great reason to be a part of a long-term group that has done well. The principle of incongruity. What is incongruity? It's the idea that two things don't fit together. They look like they could or they should. On the one hand, you have the false dichotomy, where things that belong together, people try to split them apart, falsely so. On the other hand, you have those things that people try to put together that actually are very different in nature. They might sound synonymous. It's also called false equivalence. If I were to say that Ben and Isaac are twins. Therefore, they are the same. No, that's a false equivalence. They agree with that statement. That is a false equivalence. They look a lot the same, but they are different. So I asked you to think about a question this morning. Are plainness and simplicity the same thing? They sound the same. There may be some overlap, but I think there are very important distinctions between the two of them. The Quakers are the first, as far as I know, to develop a plain style of dress. Again, it was related to the changing of culture and what they felt was important for maintaining something of enduring value. And then as Anabaptists, we tended to adopt that and brought that into our group. What is the difference? One Quaker writer has noted that simplicity is a function of individuals and can actually be individualistic. So when you think about someone like Steve Jobs, who invented the iPhone and many other things, and his wardrobe, which consisted of a black turtleneck and blue jeans, every day. That's simple. That is simple. But that's not the same thing as plainness. Otherwise, I guess we could all adopt that as our attire. Plainness is a function of a group. I can be simple in 100 different individualistic ways, but there is only several main ways of being plain. And that's what I like about the cape dress and the plain cut coat. Dunmore East did not come up with that style. Shippensburg didn't. I don't know exactly where it came from, but it is recognized across the Anabaptist world as these are plain people. In the Amish, the Conservative Brethren, and the Mennonites. If it was about cost, in reality, the plain suit and the cape dress might cost more than, say, a simple skirt and blouse and a layback coat. But the important factor is about individualism versus group. And we live in a culture that is super individualistic, very self-expressive. That's what we're fighting against. Now, if it ever shifted and went the other way and became very much of a group culture, then we'd have to navigate and negotiate that. But we're dealing with the realities of where we're at right now. And right now, it's very individualistic. How do we fight against that and pull together? I believe it is maintaining plainness of life. That includes more than clothes, for sure. But it will never include less than clothes, because clothing is a very thick practice. So plainness carries a lot more cultural weight than mere simplicity. The principle of interconnection. I think one of the most important things we can pass on to our children is the ability to think critically. God has designed this world to be a world of cause and effect. You reap what you sow. Now we know there are exceptions. The psalmist really wrestled with that. Why are there times when the righteous man gets beat up and the ungodly man seems to get off scot-free? But overall, the way God's world works, and of course in the eternal picture, it's entirely this way. It is cause and effect, no question. This is a principle and a pattern that children do not automatically understand. And so that's why I think it's important for us as parents to cultivate that within them. The reason they don't is they don't have the breadth of experience that we do. And then for another reason, their prefrontal cortex, which tells them, oh, if I do this, then this will happen, is not entirely developed yet. That's why they do irrational things. In fact, don't listen, young people, young people's prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until about 25. That's why they sometimes do crazy stuff and don't think about the ramifications. Why did God do that? I'm not entirely sure. That's a question I have. But it maybe demonstrates why it's important for young people to be willing to listen to their elders. So the challenge is to develop critical thinkers who aren't critical. What's the difference between being a critical thinker and being critical? It's motive. Motive. Why are you analyzing that other person's choices? Incidentally, if you think you're making choices in life and nobody's paying attention, that's a bad assumption. Everybody's thinking about the car you bought, the clothes you're wearing. I shouldn't say everybody, but lots and lots of people. We're not making these decisions all by ourselves. We're making them in a group. Why is she wearing her veil like that? Why did she change her veil? Why is he wearing a wristband? Why is he yawning? We engage in critical thinking a lot. Sometimes we even become critical. That's not good. No. Now, why do I say that it's important for us to cultivate this in children? It's not because we've raised our own already. Obviously, you see, we're a work in progress. It's because Heather and I have both been raised in homes where we had parents who talked with us frequently, constantly almost, about cause and effect. You see the choice that they made, and now this is what's happening. Not being critical, not wishing them ill, rather saying we need to learn some wisdom. We need to pay attention because this world is cause and effect. You can't dismiss this and expect to get a wonderful result. And it's not natural for children to think in those terms. Now, be age appropriate, of course. Little Johnny, 2 years old, you should see what they did, They made that choice, and now, no. But developing that awareness to see the choices and consequences that result. This is seeking to move young people toward wisdom in decision making. The principle of integration. Life is dynamic because we live in God-given tensions. God-given tensions. Life has paradoxes. And as we mature, it is the mature who will be able to accept and degree certain paradox. The idea that Jesus was fully God and fully man. The importance of the individual and the group. You might think I'm all about the group. No, I'm for the individual too. It's just that the main push right now is individual, so I'm pushing back with group. But I think we need to think about both entities. The paradox of keeping boundaries but reaching out. Culture and Christ, spirituality and standards. You're going to face a lot of these things in life. And as you get into leadership, you'll face them even more. There's a statement by Andy Stanley that has been hugely helpful to me in thinking through these things. He says to ask the question, is this a problem to solve or is it a tension to manage? There are lots of groups who felt like their outward identity was a problem to solve. And so if they just got rid of that, the problem would be solved. And for a while, it seems like it works. And then all of a sudden, they realize it's not solved. Now the congregation wants wedding rings. Now they want to shift on divorce and remarriage. Now they want to change their views on swearing oaths. The problem is, when you treat a tension as a problem to solve, it doesn't go away. Tensions can only be managed. And so I want to encourage you that this struggle of how much shall we be careful in our identity and how much shall we reach out and bring people in, it's not a problem. It's just a tension. That's okay. It's okay. It's going to be a lifetime of navigating tensions like these. False dichotomies happen when people try to solve tensions. That's how false dichotomies happen. So is it a problem to solve, or is it a tension to manage? Finally, I draw your attention to untapped power. Ephesians 2, 1-3 was our text. The bookends of that text, which are Ephesians 1, 15-23, and on the other side, Ephesians 2, 4-10, speak of the exceeding greatness of his power toward us who believe in 1:19. Far above, I'll say, all cultural currents in 1:21, for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them, 2:10. I want you to know that cultures have currents. They are going somewhere, and so are you. In closing, cultures wax and wane. Movements rise and fall. Companions come and go. And churches live and die. Yet in spite of these happenings, the thing that keeps me hopeful, even confident, is the reality of the kingdom of God. You know, we do our best, brothers and sisters, and we do it together. If we bind ourselves to a brotherhood, if we bind ourselves to the kingdom, if we bind ourselves to the King, we are assured of a good end, because I like to remember what Isaiah says, of the increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end. God bless you in your cultural work.